Welcome to Pilgrim Lost. Come walk with us while we explore life in hopeful motion. Welcome to Pilgrim Lost. This is a special episode that I've been looking forward to actually since we started Pilgrim Lost, to be perfectly honest. Today, we're being really honored with the presence of Dr. Randy Woodley, friend and a mentor of mine for many, many years. Dr. Woodley is a scholar and activist. He is one of the most renowned scholars, writers, speakers, thinkers in areas of justice and culture and American culture and indigenous thought and ecology and farming. And he has just influenced so many innumerable people through his work. He is a husband. He is a father of 4, grandfather of 6, and he lives on Aloha Farm, which is an indigenous center for earth justice. We're going to get into that some today. He's the author of 6, 7 books, something
like that, maybe a little more, but
these are a couple I pulled off my shelf, and you have a new one just coming out, Becoming Rooted, which we're really going to get into here. But Randy, I'm so glad to see you. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Tony. Thank you. So I'm a special guest, but I bet you say that to all your guests.
Well, on some level that's true, but I don't refer to other guests as uncle. So there's definitely more affection in this. There's a familial love that's hard to describe, and so special guest as best as I can do.
All right, I'll accept the compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, and I just want to gush because first of all, I'm like all heart and I'm that guy, but Randy is so, I mean, you and Edith have adopted us in so many ways. We've been out to your farm multiple times, out to Aloha. My kids have all been out there tons of times, and we've done building projects, and you've invited us into the community, and you've loved us, and we've done sacred experiences together. And I just so appreciative, buddy. So that's me gushing. I was trying to keep it professional, but now I just start to lose it because that's the kind of guy I am.
Thanks, Tony.
Hey, to get started, Randy, I mean, you're a Cherokee descendant, and when we first started this podcast, Kari and I, who's the co-creator, we really argued multiple times on whether to call it Pilgrim Lost. We like the name Pilgrim Lost. We like the reference to Paradise Lost as an explorative of sort of coming out of what has been lost. Like, what have we lost as culturally or being human, and how do we step into that as pilgrims, sort of embracing this metaphor of long distance trekking, or even local trekking, in order to sort of like re-engage our humanity. So that's just seemed like this really beautiful way of doing it. But the use of the word pilgrim, I just want to get what's your gut response to the word pilgrim? Do you just go, dude, that was a mistake, that's offensive? Or, I mean, anyway, what are your thoughts?
Well, at least you didn't use the word Puritan, right? So the Pilgrims in Massachusetts and Plymouth were a little better than the Puritans, at least for a while. And so, yeah, I understand the idea of a pilgrim, but it's weird in America that we ended up giving those people sort of that moniker, and now it applies to, I think Pilgrim's Progress probably had a lot to do with all that stuff, right? But yeah, so it's not the name I use, but I think it's okay. You guys, you're not going to change the name of your program now. So just Pilgrim, maybe you should put parentheses in the general sense of the word.
in a pre 16th century sense of the word, or pre whatever sense of the word. Yeah, I mean, the heart of it is, ancient pilgrimages, people go on pilgrimage, a quest for the sacred through journey, basically. It's the hope. but it definitely is a loaded term in American culture because it did get co-opted. And the first encounter with the word we got as children, most of us being raised in the United States, was a reference to early settlers and that very, very complicated history.
Yeah, I mean, like most of them were, those first, like that first generation, even though they were like, like they had this fatalism of Calvinism, and they understood, like, William Bradford, who was the second governor of Plymouth, said when they discovered the Wampanoag village and the bones and all, then they found all they were dead from disease, basically, right? And then they discovered all these stores of corn and things, food hidden. And then his reaction, of course, was a typical Pilgrim reaction at the time, which was, surely the God of heaven has wiped out the inhabitants of this land to make room for us. Right. So it's a loaded sort of a term,
Yeah.
but there was a time of sort of peacefulness, that first generation anyway. Yeah. So, hey, you work with what you got.
Aloha, Indigenous Center for Earth Justice. You guys acquired a new property, what, 3 years ago now?
It's not even been 2 years yet.
Okay, 2
April
years ago.
1st will be 2 years. Yeah.
How's it going? How's the development going? And can you just talk a little bit about what it is that Aloha does and how you guys expand this vision of Earth justice through it?
Yeah.
You and Edith.
Yeah. So we had the place in Newburgh, which you've visited many times.
Many times, yeah.
And but it was just not only it was not laid out right. It was more of just a farm, and we always wanted to be more than a farm. The zoning restrictions were really tight there. We couldn't do what we needed to do in terms of our original vision, which is to have schools and things like this. And so when it came sort of time to sell, we had this scurry. We thought about buying some land in New Mexico that was up for sale, and then
Right.
the guy we went down there, and the guy ended up backing out of the deal. Basically, he changed the terms of everything, so we weren't going to go for that. And so we ended up, like, basically we'd already sold our home, and we ended up in Maupin, which is Central Oregon, if people don't know, for 9 months. And then we finally found this place back in Yamhill County, where we're 20 miles or 20 minutes, I should say, from our old place. It's a really nice, diverse bioregion, sort of lots of different things going on here, from wetlands to wooded forest to scrub to, some open areas, meadows. And so it's just really, really a dynamic place in terms of nature. And there's a lot of wildlife here. And so we section off a little section for us for the farm, and then the rest is, for the animals to roam freely. And we see regularly out our front window deer and fawns walking and eating grass in our front and all those kinds of things. And eagles flying overhead, and hawks. And it's just it's a really nice place. We've developed it quite a bit, Edith and I, that first year, a little over a year, until we had any help. We started having volunteer help once a month, but Edith and I basically did everything from putting up fences to building well houses to, building a greenhouse and sort of getting things going. And it took a while, but we've got a lot done, I think, in the last 2 years almost. And so now this summer, we're hoping to start having some schools and things. So we're going to be building a building this summer. It's a rustic kind of pole barn type building, but that's where we'll have our classes, and we'll be able to have some bunkhouses in there. And we've got a little camping area also. And basically we teach and mentor, and we eventually want to hold like a couple summits a year where we can open it up to everybody. But yeah, we're sort of doing the same thing we've been doing all along for the last 30 years or more, which is reaching both into our native community and non-native community so that we can all heal together and decolonize. That's sort of the number one goal, is to start the decolonization process, or meet people where they're at in that. and then to help everybody indigenize. So, and a lot of people are like, well, how do you indigenize if you're not indigenous? Well, we're all indigenous from somewhere.
Mhm.
Just time and space is the difference. And so I think that Creator has put in us that sense of living with the land instead of living on the land or extracting from the land. And so we've been trying to do that for a number of years, and we model that. We have a seed company. We take people through the stages of growth and planting and companion planting and the spirituality of the land and how it connects to our faith journeys, our spirituality, I would say. Yeah, all of that. And it's not a classroom setting, which is what I like. I'll be out of the classroom in less than a year, and we'll be sitting around a fire in different places like that, doing our classes, so to speak. But yeah, that's kind of what we've had in mind all along. That's what we had in Kentucky originally, that we lost to the white supremacists, and so we're getting back to our original vision, and hopefully things will go as well as they seem like they always have. It's also a place for ceremony. We want to have our native ceremonies here, and so we've carved out some space for that. But we've also made room for all the wildlife so that we're not taking up all the land. So yeah.
Nice. And if anybody ever wants to get their hands on non-modified historical seeds, Aloha is a great place to go. And you guys, nurture and harvest that whole thing as a gift to the world. And I love
Yeah,
all that.
that's really important to us. Yeah, to keep the seeds free and to keep a lot of these, heirloom and especially the native heirloom seeds going. And also, uh, the last Saturday of every month, we have Volunteer Day. And so, we take groups at other times as well, but just it's an open call for volunteers the last Saturday of the month, every month, starting February and ending in November. So it's almost every month of the year. So yeah, we welcome people to come out. And there's actually a volunteer sign up page on our website. If you go to
Great.
aloha.org, and then there's a section for volunteers. Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about your new book because I was excited when it came out, and I couldn't get a copy. I went on Amazon multiple times. They were sold out. I wrote you. I said, Randy, where do I go to get your book? You're like, go check Barnes and Noble because everyone's selling out. So
You got
your,
it.
your new book, Becoming
Wow.
Rooted. I've been in it for about 2 weeks. I'm very
Oh, man.
happy. 100 days of reconnecting with sacred earth, becoming rooted. And okay, so any excuse to talk to you, that's just a given. But in light of the community around Pilgrim Lost, we've been having this conversation over the last month, 2 months, over the last 2 months about the stranger. We've been talking about the stranger, and specifically, I'm just going to do a little setup here so you kind of understand what we've been discussing. We brought on these guys from this film, I'll Push You, where a man wanted to walk the Camino de Santiago, the 600 miles, but he's in a wheelchair. And so his best friend pushed him to 600 miles over 3 mountain ranges to get him. And one of the things we talked about was the sensation when you're on pilgrimage, when you're on the Camino de Santiago, the sensation that everyone around me on the Camino, we're all in the same story. We're not in different stories. We're all in the same story. So everyone just is your friend. You just assume everyone is your friend. And it's this sensation of like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And there's just no hesitancy. Everybody you see, you get in conversation with, where like when I walk around Portland, it's sometimes hard to get in a conversation with a stranger because the assumption is we're in different stories. And then last episode, we got on with Jeremy Valorand, and he runs a slave freeing organization around the world called Rescue Freedom International. And he does these long treks to raise money so that while you're giving this huge gift to yourself to go on these long treks to nourish your body and nourish your community, you can simultaneously be raising funds to nourish the body and the community of people on the other side of the world who are suffering in this very, very particular way, bringing freedom to the world. And that even the person on the other side of the world is not a stranger, that in this process, I discover that we're in the same story as part of this sort of global thing. And what I want to talk to you about, and what becoming rooted is so much about, is that the natural world, sacred earth, that we're in the same story with sacred earth. And this entire 100 days, you're just opening up all of these, you're pulling back all these layers to go, here's a way to connect with sacred earth. Here's a way to connect with, here's a very specific practice you can do. Anyway, now I'm doing your job. Can you can you just talk about how, because we're just addicted. We're addicted. We're speciesists. We think, that humans are the ultimate and maybe the only real species worthy of connecting with. And yet, and you've written multiple books on this topic, but this book in particular, to deprogram that. Can you just talk through what you're trying to do? And then I just want to get into how, like, help us with how.
Yeah. So the problem you identified, right? We got a big fancy word for that, right? Anthropocentrism. So that means that you think human beings are like more deserving and better than, and deserve more privilege than everything else on earth, which is not at all, a view that's going to sustain us. It's part of the Western worldview, which is based on what I call Platonic dualism, and sort of the idea that the spiritual, ethereal, mind, etc., are receive priority over the material or bodies or the earth, and that, unfortunately, that kind of thinking, which was brought about by empire and colonization, now is in all of our systems, economically, educationally, religion, you name it, and so basically we catch these things more than we're taught. And so, it's all around us, it's in us, and it's what we hear. And so, in order to break away from that unhealthy worldview, because that Western worldview is really a sick worldview, it's based on competition and exploitation and all those kinds of things. And
Right.
it is not sustained us well, first of all, and it will not sustain us into the future. We're starting to see the end of that. And so what do we have to do? We have to begin to adopt a different way of thinking, a different worldview. And for my best understanding, an indigenous worldview, a more indigenous worldview, especially if we take on the values of those peoples who have lived on this continent for 28,000 plus years, and who've learned, not who weren't perfect, but learned along the way sort of how to live with the land here. And if we can begin to adopt that kind of an outlook on life, then we might be able to continue to have the privilege to be co-sustainers of this earth with Creator and the rest of creation. And so it's a big order, it's a tall order, but our time's running short. And they were just new. NOAA just released a new report, and there's been lots of different United Nations and others reports on, like, things are worse than we think, and they're worse that we're willing to admit. And so how are we going to learn to live with the earth? This is a way that you can go on a journey and you don't have to leave home, right? We all are connected, like you said, through the earth. That's what we have in common. And so now we need to develop those common values around the earth so that we can live well together with the rest of the community of creation. And so that's like starting point. I didn't write it for any particular religion. I didn't write it for any particular philosophy. I wrote it because I believe all people have this in common, which makes us all spiritual beings. And so if you have any sense of spirituality at all, then this is a book that helps people on a daily basis to think about things in a different way as they look out at creation. And I share a lot of my own personal experiences and things like that throughout the book, but they're just very short tidbits. And then at the end, the thing I'm most excited about is at the very end, there's a little exercise to kind of move you beyond just thinking, right? So that breaks up the dualism. It's like, get out and do something. Because, I think, for a lot of us in Western mindset, it's like, if we think the right things, we think we're doing the right things, right? And this has nothing to do with just thinking. This has to do actually with connecting. And all of us can do that. And we can do it right where we're at. In fact, I encourage people to do it right there in their own yards and in their own communities. So to get involved with creation, right there where it's happening around you.
Okay. First of all, I'm not, I've done more reading than most on world religions, but inevitably you come across streams in almost every world religion that emphasizes sort of returning to the natural, reconnecting with the natural as an inherent part of spirituality around the world, and then increasingly counseling and therapies are embracing this. Somatic counseling and some other things are embracing this reconnecting with nature as a part of the healing process, that part of what this this wounding, this bondage, whatever you want to call it, this paralysis of the modern human experience is partially healed by reconnecting with one another, certainly, but also reconnecting with nature, with the creation. But you made this great statement. You said it's something that is caught, not learned. Caught. And when you catch something, the unraveling of it is sometimes more difficult than even ideas. And so, I'm reading the book, and at the end of every chapter, you've got a meditation. You've got, go on a walk today and engage creation in this way. Like, can you just kind of talk about sort of how to uncatch, or how to maybe catch a different mindset?
Yeah. While it seems like a tall order, right? I mean,
Yes.
changing your worldviews. I mean, anthropologists used to say that worldviews are immutable. That means they can't be moved, they can't be changed. But we know that's not true. In fact, I always say that it's never been true, um, because women who've been largely discriminated against by men in lots of societies, not all societies, have always had to sort of, especially in the United States, have had to think both with their own viewpoint as a woman and a man's world, a man's viewpoint, in order to sort of make it. And so it's not hard. And they call it, there's another big fancy word coming up here. There's a phrase that anthropologists use called indigenous cosmopolitanism. And that means there are people who can not just act in two cultures properly, but can see from two different worldviews. In other words, the things that are caught, the things that no one has to teach, those values and all those things that go there. And so as we look at, like, okay, how do we change that? We think, okay, that's going to be a horrible, terrible, long, my, a lot of my books I write and I kind of take it on theologically and philosophically and try to kind of take it head on. This book, I'm just trying to get people to walk with me for 100 days
Mm.
or as many as that you can during that period. Right. And I made it accessible and readable, and so that you can just sit down real quick and in 5 minutes basically read it and hopefully think about it throughout the day. But what happens with the things that are caught, that worldview, is once you start unraveling one thread, it all starts to fall apart. That's the beautiful thing about it. And I've seen this happen so many times when people if you want to call it the decolonization process or whatever, shifting your worldview. It's like, even sometimes just one experience does it. Um, and it's like once you sort of tear at the fabric of that foundational thread of the Western worldview, and you see how false it is in so many ways, and how it's not meant for people to live on this earth with, then all of a sudden you start noticing it all around you. And then the idea is what we call basically continuing to decolonize and then indigenize. Learn, like, what does it mean to then live with the land and live with people and live with these kinds of values that have sustained people for so long.
Can you talk at all? And this, I may be phrasing this wrong, but is there a way to implement like greeting the earth, or greeting our non-human neighbors as we go about life? Is that something that you practice, or is that something that you would encourage?
Yeah. So, well, I practice a little ritual, and I know I shared this with you before, in the mornings of a little abbreviated water ceremony. So in the old days, the Katuas, the people in my group, ethnic group, would go to water and then they would pray each day. And another way they did it was to greet the sun and hold their hands up and pray and
Right.
bless themselves. And so I use a number of those kinds of things, but in terms of greeting, like an official greeting, there's a wonderful thing people can look up. Uh, you can write it as the Iroquois Thanksgiving prayer, but it will come up as the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving prayer, and it's a greetings to the natural world, right? And in that prayer is so beautiful because it goes through everything, to the plants, the food plants, and the medicine plants, and the trees, and the sun, and the and it finally ends with the wise teachers, and then the Creator. And so it's a beautiful thing. We use it actually at Thanksgiving time, but and we read the whole thing. It's a beautiful way to even if you did like one of those in the morning, one section at a time. There's probably 25 sections in there. Yeah,
Wow.
that's a
We
nice little practice.
we're going to try and track that down, and we'll have it in the show notes for people to at least find a link to go see it. It sounds like it's too long maybe to print in the show notes, but
Yeah,
maybe we'll probably print it on the blog. Maybe we'll print it on the blog so people can go there and see it. I do this thing, and tell me if I'm missing it. I've been doing it for years. So I walk around the city. You know this. I'll go for 5 to 10 mile walks around the city as a regular part of my personal practice, my pilgrim practice, trying to live out these values, greeting neighbors. But the diversity of trees in Portland for an urban center is, to me, is stunning. I mean,
incredible. Yeah,
it's stunning. I mean, I know that it's a concrete covered world, but the diversity is unbelievable. And I have my favorite trees that I visit as I walk. And I have this thing where I can't help but put my hands on the texture and my nose and the bark, as I pass the trees, just as my own way of sort of a multi-sensory kind of connection with these unbelievable creatures that are older than me, that will be here when I'm gone, probably some of them. Does that speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, and you say, okay, yeah, but look at the life. And one of the things I talk about is urban people, just there to get out in your yard and look at the life going on around you. Actually, there's
Yeah.
way more than what you suspect, right? I mean, of course there's the squirrels, and there's the birds, and there's the trees, and there's the bushes, but if you look deep enough, I mean, under those sidewalks and under that concrete, there's a whole world moving around, and you know, uh, reproducing and eating each other and all this. They say in one handful of healthy soil, good, healthy, composty soil, there's more microbes than there are people who have ever lived on the earth.
Hmm.
And so even in unhealthy places, you're going to have something going on, right? And so, and then those trees, like if everybody walked out of the city right now, and I don't know how long, but not long, all those sidewalks and all those buildings and everything would be gone. But guess what would still be there? The soil and the trees and the
Right.
bushes and the animals and the birds. And so we just got to get our perspective right. We think that those things that we build are the monuments to humanity, right? And and it's all about making it life easier for us. But we forget that we live in a whole community of creation, and we are just co-sustainers with everything else and with the Creator to continue to keep things moving in a positive direction. And so that our harmony way. Aloha is a Cherokee word that means the earth's producing in abundance. The whole community of creation is at peace with one another. Nobody's warring with one another. Um, everybody has enough to eat. Those kinds of things. Not utopia, but living the way that we were actually meant to live. These are what I call the original instructions. And you can get a little bit of that, even in the urban settings. And you're an expert on that, Tony. There's a lot going on. Not just with people. So, but to remember, we're among a whole community of creation.
I have these moments. They don't happen very often. Every few months, I have these moments where I'm out walking in my neighborhood, and I may have been walking for an hour and a half, and nothing special, just another day out, getting a little exercise, maybe greeting a few neighbors on the way. No big deal. And then maybe I'll take a couple of deep breaths, like really, breathe in through my nose, really take in a good lung full of oxygen. And suddenly I'll look around and I kid you not, suddenly everything will be 3 times more beautiful than it was a second earlier. Like the greens will be greener, the reds will be redder, the textures will be more dynamic, the sky will be bluer. Like just suddenly I'll just be like, holy smokes, like what just happened? And I don't know what's going on there, but it kind of it freaks me out. And then I just try and sit in it. I just try and hold it as long as possible because I don't want it to go away.
Yeah. So we're like living in the moment, right?
Mm.
Paying attention to what's going on around us. We have all of a sudden the consciousness that, sort of how small we are and how alive everything is around us. And I think those things happen to me after I sit for a little while, usually. And all of a sudden I realize, geez, I'm just a little part of all this, but there's so
Mm.
much going on, you know, and, a lot's not going to change out here when I'm no longer out here. Right.
Mm.
It's just going to keep going.
Mm.
But I'm privileged to be able to be a part of it and to try and make it as great as I can while I'm here for my, not just myself and my children, my grandchildren, the next 7 generations. And really, like, who does it belong to? It belongs to the creator and it belongs to everyone.
Mm.
And that's the wonderful thing about it. We don't sort of own anything out here. We don't get to take it with us. We end up back as, humus or soil. Eventually, no matter, how long you postpone it, you're going to end up back there. And then life goes on. The circle's completed. So um, we get to be part of that system. And if we're really privileged, we get to like make a difference and make it better. So.
In becoming rooted right at the end of the first section, and if I'm stepping on something too sacred that you don't want to share on this podcast, just say whatever. But you share a dream that you had, a really sort of unbelievable mystical dream. Is that something you'd be willing to share, or at least share maybe the conclusion of it if you don't want to tell all the details of it?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I don't usually talk about that. In fact, I hesitated to write it in the book, but I
I,
thought,
I felt that. I felt that when I was reading it, so
yeah,
that's why I'm being tender.
it's too important a lesson to not share, right? And so, yeah, so Edith and I were in New Mexico at the place they call the Ghost Ranch, which is a retreat type center. And we were at there was a thing called something like Native Elders and Spirituality, and we were invited. We were like definitely the elder juniors there, and but there were some Pueblo elders and Navajo and others, and we participated all week long in sharing stories and teachings, and eventually it was time to go. And just before we left, I was asked to be a part of this ceremony with a Olmec Mexican shaman as a closing sort of ceremony, and I felt privileged to be asked to do that. So we were on our way home, and during that time there, I had shared so many times my mantra at that time, which was like, "We're healing the land," right?
Hmm.
We're healing the land. And people come out to Newburgh, and I'd say, well, "Yeah, we're listening to the land, and we're healing the land," And it became a sort of a thing that, like, it was like part of my identity. It's like, well, that's our job, is to heal the land, right? And and so on the way back, we were at a hotel, and I had a dream. And I'd had lots of different kinds of dreams in the past, some just dreams and some sacred and animal dreams and other things like this that I knew, like, were lesson teaching, but I never had a dream of plants. And plants are primordial, to say the least. It's something deep, much deeper, if you think about it, how long they've been here and how long they stay here. And I had this dream, and all of a sudden I was at Aloha, and all the plants were standing in front of me. And there was one particular small plant, I don't know what kind it was, kind of standing in front. And without saying a word, all the plants together spoke in my consciousness and just said this: we are healing you. Mm. And all of a sudden I realized how small I am, how privileged I am that I get to be a part of that healing. And it's like, I think I'm in control of healing the land. No, the land is healing me, and the land is healing us. And if we allow it to, that's exactly why it's here. Yeah. To
Thank
learn
you.
from it, to use the plant medicines, there's so much that nature has to teach us. It's just, we've just kind of forgotten how to learn from our primary and longest lasting teacher on earth, which is the earth herself.
Randy, it's so great. And this is, I mean, I kind of did that then, probably because it's you, and I'm sort of always looking for your blessing on my life. I kind of painted myself better than I am a little bit on this episode. The reality is, most of the time I have earbuds in. I'm listening to ESPN podcasts. I'm using walking as a way to check out, disconnect, numb even, and walking are my times in nature, even when I'm out on my kayak or whatever. And the encouragement of basically the time we spent together, but reading Becoming Rooted is hearkening to earlier conversations we've had, and it's bringing up thoughts. And Randy, I think it's your best writing. I really love Becoming Rooted. It's so multidimensional in how you're writing, and so evocative. That's the word I wanted. It's so evocative.
Yeah. Something happens when you get, I'll admit, something happens when you get older. You start to see, well, at least I have, I think, hopefully start to see more clearly. Right. Start to see how the pieces fit together a little better. And I'm glad that I wrote this book at this time in my life, as opposed to 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Right.
And I've got 2 other books coming out for people interested in more theological things this year.
Really?
Yeah. So I've got a book coming out April 19th called, if you want to look into this from a theological perspective, it's called Indigenous Theology in the Western Worldview, with Baker Academic Books, and it can be pre-ordered now. I think the subtitle is a decolonial view of Christian doctrine or something like that. But basically, where I go through this whole idea of Platonic dualism and how it's creeped into our religion and theologies and things like that, and some of the ways to get out of that. And then I have a book coming out in the late fall called The Mission and the Cultural Other, A Closer Look, which is a sort of a critique of the whole modern American mission movement. So I think we've been doing that wrong. So yeah. So anyway, I should have, by the end of the year, I should have 3 books out, and hopefully they'll all be some of my best writing. So
I'm sure they are. And then you and my old buddy Bo Sanders, you guys are still doing Piecing It All Together podcast.
We are, as we can. We're both very busy.
Yeah.
I think we've done maybe 70, 80 episodes by now, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are all available anywhere you get podcasts.
Yeah.
And
Piecing is spelled Peacing. Yeah.
Yeah. PEAC. It's on the screen. Piecing It All Together. And before we say goodbye again, sadly, anything else you'd like to say you haven't had a chance to say?
Well, I just think that if you're thinking of making a change in your life, that this is a good time to do it because there's a lot going on.
Right.
We're like looking for new stuff. We got Gen Z and millennials, a whole two generations there that are like ready to do something different. And so we're sort of like poised, like an arrow being drawn back right now. And so the question is, well, what do I shoot for? What's the target?
Right.
Well, the target can be changing your own worldview and adopting them, decolonizing and making a more indigenous worldview so that you can live better with your fellow human beings and the rest of creation. And so just encourage you to do that. I'm not the only person doing this. I'm just trying to do my part. But yeah, if people can like say, all right, I've I've been suffering through all this for the last few years and this crazy, political stuff for the last
Right.
5 years, 6 years, whatever. And now it's time for me to like really change things up. It's a great time to do it. So do it.
Yeah, and this as we slowly crawl out of COVID and the upheaval, like you were saying, these last 3 or so years, or however long it's been, it feels like a rebirthing time, and in a rebirthing time, y- you have a lot of autonomy, or a lot of will in, am I going to remove? Am I going to further hide within um, sort of a protective matrix of
Mhm.
ideas, or am I going to become more open, more free, more curious of the other, of the different? And my one of the things we talk about on Pilgrim Lost a lot is that curious lifestyle.
Yeah. And that agency, if it's
See that?
like, if we've been feeling like tossed back and forth and, not much control or whatever, agency is something that we ourselves can take a hold of and do, and it gives ourselves dignity and gives others dignity around us and freedom. And so this is the time for change. Yeah.
Dr. Woodley, Randy, Uncle Randy, thank you so much. You can find Randy at Piecing It All Together, PEAC, Piecing It All Together podcast, randywoodley.com, Elohe.org, Eloheseeds.com. And his new book is Becoming Rooted, 100 Days of Reconnecting with Sacred Earth.
They will, just so people know, I don't know when this will actually come out, but we sold out in the first 3 weeks. Uh,
Too
and
bad.
it sold a couple thousand copies in, and they've got another like double that amount coming out. Should be start shipping March 1st. So
Great.
yeah.
Great. And this episode, I think, is up the first week of March, so hopefully
Okay,
they'll
so
be
they should be able to
available.
order it.
And so go check it out, and better move fast, because apparently Randy writes books that sell out, unlike my books. And never
Well,
sold
it's the
out.
first time for everything, right? So
Oh, well done, well done,
yeah,
everyone.
thanks,
This
buddy.
this is Pilgrim Lost. What a treat to be with Randy, and what a treat to be with all of you. I hope that you're connecting with your loved ones, your sacred neighbors all around you, every day, every week, as we continue to explore wholeness, a life of integrated curiosity and creativity. And as always, thanks for getting lost with us.
Thanks, Tony.